Hey guys, it's Joe, and in this video I'll be demonstrating the Vintage VCA in my compression series. The Vintage VCA is quite a versatile compressor that works well on buses and instruments with a wide frequency range. This makes it great for a drum bus and also works nicely on pianos and guitars too. A couple of things to consider with this compressor is that it does introduce quite a lot of saturation when you use it. This is great if you want that sound, but if you just want a clean compression, this isn't the one for that. Again, that's why it works nicely on a drum bus, because the saturation makes it sound really crisp and full. Lower frequencies also introduce more compression, so if you have a particularly subby kick, then that will introduce more compression, which can be useful if you want to tame it and make it sound more punchy, but if not, it can cause an issue. All the parameters in this can be changed, so you have a lot of control over it, which I really like as it can make it really precise for what you want. I'm going to be applying this to my drum bus in a song I've been working on. The drums are pretty straightforward with a kick, a couple of hats, a snare and a clap. I want to beef this up quite a bit without killing the transients on the kick or the snare, so I'm going to use the Vintage VCA with a medium to high ratio, a medium attack and then a timed release. I'm aiming for around 4 to 5 dB of gain reduction, so it'll make the drums sound punchy but not flat. I'm going to set the ratio to around 4 to 1 and make it a hard knee that I'm using as well, which is very typical for drum compression. Then I'm going to put the attack up to 100 milliseconds, and I'm also just going to leave the release at 50. I'm going to set the threshold quite low so we're getting about minus 10 dB of gain reduction so we can really hear what everything's doing. Once we've found that, I'm going to then start to reduce the attack to make it quicker so we can start to hear when the kick and the snare transients are being killed, and then just dial it back off a little bit. We can now really hear what the compressor's doing, and it's also a good time to change any other settings like the ratio, but now we're just going to start to drop that attack down so we can hear the effect on the kick and the snare. Okay, so it's starting to sound really flat around here, so we're just going to ease it back off a little bit, maybe 15 milliseconds. Okay, so it's starting to sound quite nice at 50 milliseconds here. So a quick attack isn't always a bad thing, like in parallel compression for example, but in this case I don't want to smash it, which is why I've eased it back quite a bit. Now I want to time the release. I want the needle to reset on each beat of each kick and each snare, so it adds a groove. You should really start to hear it breathe as you lengthen the release. This is also a good time to set the threshold for that -4 or -5 dB reduction. Otherwise the release won't be accurate when we change the threshold later, so let's just do that first. Okay, so I'm going to go for about 4 dB reduction. Now we'll change the release so it's timed. Okay, it's sounding and looking quite good at about 120 milliseconds. It won't go all the way down to 0 because I'm also compressing the hi-hats that are in between the kick hits, but this is what we're aiming for. Now you can either apply the make-up gain and just make up for that signal we've lost, so add another 4 dB, or you can use the distortion, which is what I'm going to do here, and just use a soft distortion to really help crisp and beef up these drums. We can really hear how much that's beefed up the kick, and that may not sit perfectly in the mix, but we can just fix that with some EQ or just adjust these settings afterwards too, and it's really just brought the whole thing to life. Now let's just A and B the signal with and without the compressor to really hear that difference. Let's also just have a quick listen to these settings on some of the other compressors to hear the difference between them. So this is a very clean compressor with little character, but it is compressing it more and not responding quite how I want it to. Again, this sounds quite different, but it's compressing it less this time, but it's still not responding to the low end of the kick in a way I'd like. The Vintage VCA is making the drums sound really quite energetic whilst beefing up the kick nicely as well. It's not squashing everything too much, so it doesn't sound overcompressed or unnatural either. The Vintage VCA is a really straightforward compressor that gives some great results nice and easily, while still adding some character to your sound. I hope you found this video useful, and if you have any questions, please leave a comment or contact me via my website. Thanks a lot for watching, cheers.